Good Friday morning, everybody. Thanks for checking into the TDR Trade to Black podcast. We're finishing strong here this morning as we bring in Charlie Bachtell, CEO of Cresco Labs, to talk about their latest numbers, some really interesting stats about cash flow, what they just reported. So we'll talk to him and dive into that and the reasons why. David Culver, Senior Vice President of the United States Cannabis Council, joins us once again to provide insight on what we learned this week. We got knocked down, but we're back up. And I'm actually hearing a lot of positive momentum regarding the Trump administration and policy towards cannabis at an event I was at last night. So I'll get into that. So let's dive into today's podcast. Anthony Varel, a lot of great feedback from yesterday's podcast. I'm not kidding you. That could have been the best one we've had yet. A lot of tremendous ideas, but direction and insight on what we can expect next from Mr. Boris Jordan.
Yeah, Boris came out swinging. I mean, he obviously drank his coffee yesterday afternoon. It was an insightful conversation. I think some of the best feedback that we got was it was the meat and the potatoes that was off script as per like the earnings call. There was a lot of tidbits there that could reverberate throughout the sector, not necessarily unique to Curaleaf, but it was a great conversation and it was quite insightful. I mean, if we get some of that stuff to materialize, could be a very interesting next couple of months and quarters.
Yeah. Well, one of those other big name MSO executives that we want to hear from and get his intake on, like, you know, what we're going to expect next for the industry is Charlie Bachtell from Cresco Labs, who just reported their latest earnings. As we bring in Charlie back to the podcast, happy Friday morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Glad to be here.
How's it going?
Yeah. What a whirlwind of a week in this space. What are you making it?
The week? A whirlwind of a week. Look, I think everybody would have liked to have seen Amendment 3 be successful down in Florida. Important, though, that nobody loses sight of the fact that 56% of people voted for it, which, again, by any indication, is an overwhelming victory in a majority type situation. It's just 60% is a high bar. But again, very influential state showing bipartisan support for appropriate cannabis legalization. It's, you know, I like the setup for the sector going forward. I do.
Okay. What's that say at 56.7% about a future of this being retabled? Like, does this help as much as we didn't get what we wanted this week? Does this help things later on down the road?
Yeah, because again, I think, well, when you look at turnout and sort of voter profile too, you can expect that there's even stronger support down there for it. And if there's a better turnout from certain groups, but yeah, look, anytime you got 56% approval on any issue, that's a winning issue for a politician. And so I don't think there should be, other than the fact that we're not going to have adult use in Florida starting next year, that should not be looked at as a loss. It's just that the high hurdle wasn't reached. That majority support bodes well for Outllook going forward. And then if you look at the national race for president, look, we did have two candidates that for the first time ever came out in support of reform on cannabis going forward. And regardless of who you voted for, you know, we have the results. We know who the next administration is. And the fact that he's made multiple statements for his support for a common sense approach to cannabis laws, for safe banking, for rescheduling, for a states' rights approach to cannabis. I think it's important. Those are not only are those important points for anybody to make, but for him in particular, you know, he tends to be somebody who follows through on his conviction, and also can mobilize the people around him, including the legislators, to help him follow through on his convictions. So we look forward to working with him on this. I think it's a positive thing for the sector.
I've been hearing nothing but positive things as an event last night in Michigan, and a lot of people I was speaking to that have direct contacts from people from Washington. The NCR was there as well, but I'm hearing a lot of positive things about policy related to cannabis in the Trump administration. So we'll get into that a little bit later with David Culver and a few things, but we want to have you on, talk about latest earnings. So let's dive into that. They included record.
Chad, before one last thing on that topic before we jump off of it. I look forward to having a conversation with his administration about this dynamic where non-US based companies have access to arguably this country's number one asset, which is our capital markets. And the top performers in this sector, these US companies that employ 500,000 Americans, paid over $4 billion last year in state tax revenue don't have access to the capital markets. I can think of very few things that are more un-American than that concept. And I think you also have a leader now sitting in that seat that message will resonate with.
Charlie, I'm going off script. Is that the first step?
Point.
That's a great point. I think
It's
this is the message.
You know what I mean? Like we've had these conversations, and everybody who's in the sector, and your audience in particular, this is an educated audience base. The frustration I think all of the cannabis stakeholders have had is this is such a common sense issue that needs to be dealt with in a common sense manner for, I would say, years, but I mean, in reality, it's decades and it's generations, but especially in the last years where we've had regulated, compliance-focused approach to state laws getting passed, 40 out of 50 states with state laws. You know, we're so past the tipping point of this being a common sense approach to this. The legislators can't bury their heads in the sand anymore. They need to deal with it. And now, and again, I think this would have been the case with either administration, but this administration in particular, these messages resonate with very clearly. So again, look forward to working with them on this.
Can't help but agree with that, right, Anthony?
No, I mean, I think it's a very powerful statement. It's a solid observation that I don't think is talked about enough, that one of the number one drivers in this country are capital markets. Yep. We have deep, rich capital markets, and the fact that we are seeing Canadian companies come in, list on our exchanges with the same businesses. Granted, it's legal in Canada versus a Schedule I narcotic in the United States. There's some obvious merit there to them being able to list, but we have Schedule III. We have champions for the industry. The conversation is going to get done, and here are the steps that you can take to where we're going to allow this industry to access the capital markets, as well as acknowledge the 500,000 participants from a job perspective come out of, let's say, the gray area and be able to have the same benefits as everyday Americans that participate in our economy.
Yeah.
I mean, those are very strong arguments as to why this industry needs to be reformed. And I think Charlie just hit it perfectly on the head.
Yeah. And that's probably the number one reason why they won this election. Immigration concerns and obviously jobs related to the economy. And that's how they're going to view things. And onwards and upwards. But let's dive in, as I said, latest numbers that included record quarterly operating cash flow of $49 million. I think it's important to maybe stop and pause and reflect on this number. What's this number, I guess, say about your company? It's impressive.
It's the continuation of, I don't want to bring up You're the Core. I need to get that hat made. But you know, like we've said before, it's in the DNA now. So for us, you know, managing the markets that we're in, there's going to be, when you have a multi-state footprint, you're going to have some noise in a state here, and it's a different state the next quarter and whatever. But making sure that your company is dynamic enough to keep up with the dynamic nature of this industry is, like, I think that's job number one for us. And I've said it before, I've got a team of ninjas at this point that have these great traditional industry backgrounds that now have 5+ years of cannabis experience, and figuring out how to pull on the right lever at the right time in the right way in each state is what we've been maniacally focused on for the last 18, 24 months. And it's just who we are now. So, you know, the great thing about it, not only is it solid performance that creates solid financials, but it also sets us up nicely to really take advantage of growth opportunities, like for states that we don't have in our footprint that our peers do. We have opportunity. We have opportunity to add. Those are new states for us. So even if those states are feeling their own sort of settling or maturing, they'll be new to us, which is nice.
Yeah.
So you mentioned pulling the right levers at the right times. Your number one market share, I think you maintained it in Illinois, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. Florida is obviously a big part of the conversation. It's a market that you've been trending up while others have stagnated and or been losing market share as far as, let's say, the dominant tier 1 MSOs in the space. Strategically, what's your view on this market moving forward? Do you see interesting pricing dynamics start to develop with some of your peers investing in grow and now not having the adult use market to tap? How are you going to, what's the plan to tackle or continue that upwards momentum for Cresco and Florida moving forward?
Yeah, you could see that, like the path forward there. If there was infrastructure build to prepare for adult use, and now that demand isn't there to meet it, I can't control what other companies are going to do. And one of the things that we've always loved about Florida is that market is what you will make of it, right? It's an execution story because you're on an island. Yeah, that forced vertical integration, it really requires you to come up with your game plan and execute it. And so that's how we've been able to improve our position there over the last year and a half, is focusing on delivering that quality product at the right price, so that value proposition hits for consumers, that customer experience hits when they come into Sunnyside. And the great thing about that is if you do execute, you have a differentiated offering automatically, because that dispensary across the street doesn't carry the same shelf as you do. It's a different product, it's a different experience. In all the other markets, you can go into Illinois, and where we have a large market share position, the shelves are going to look similar from dispensary to dispensary to dispensary. Not the case in Florida. So we'll continue to execute our playbook. We'll see what the peers down there do. I think, look, each company is going to make their own decision on how to approach Florida going forward.
Yeah.
Just to harp on Florida a little bit more, from the success that you're seeing. I mean, we watched the OMMU numbers. It's been trending up tremendously. Is it dialing in consistency of product? Is it consumer loyalty? Like, are there certain things you can point to that's been working for you in Florida? Or is it just all around overall success of, I guess, dialing everything in and getting it streamlined?
I think maybe, again, even more so than any other market, because of that isolated nature of your product offering in your store to that consumer. You've got to hit on product quality. But again, it's that matching up of quality and price, right? It's the value proposition needs to be dialed in, and then everything kind of flows from there. If you've got garbage product, it doesn't matter what your promotion strategy is or your loyalty plan, but all those things are ands, right? And when you can layer those on top of each other, you get good results.
Yeah. We always focus on the 80-20 rule. I was at an event last night, and some of the feedback was that some doors in Michigan have as much as 500 SKUs, and a lot of bud tenders just can't keep up with the amount of education. And you see churn because you can't just wrap your head around that. So like we saw in the cannabis space from an operations standpoint, where companies scale back the amount of states that they operated in, it feels like we're now in this sort of era where it's like, focus on basically the core strategy or brands that you feature, and that generates obviously profitability. Because as Boris said, Anthony, yesterday, you spend less marketing dollars on brands that actually are really, really good because you have continuous business. Do you care to elaborate or make comment on that? And is that a strategy that definitely has grabbed your attention as well?
I think if I boil that down to rationalization, I think rationalization is at the core of what all of us need to be doing to make sure that you're not, we don't have the luxury with the structures that apply to the cannabis space. You don't have the luxury to make too many mistakes or to carry too much dead weight with you going forward, whether that's on a product portfolio basis, a brand basis, initiatives that really don't provide near-term returns, state profiles. Like, all of those things need to be really focused. And that, I think that's where you're seeing some of the companies separate themselves from that operational execution standpoint.
Yeah.
It's heavy rationalization across your entire business.
Yeah, agreed.
And then another market you got the number one share in is Pennsylvania, that we were all, I don't want to say looking to, but that's where some of the growth narrative can come from down the road. Anything that you're hearing as far as getting a bill potentially across the line, let's say in 2025, to bring adult use into the state of Pennsylvania once and for all?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there was a lot of momentum in the veto session there leading up to the election timeframe, and there were a few days that were canceled at the end of it, and we were optimistic that momentum was going to result in a good outcome before the election kind of wiped everything off the desk, but it didn't come to fruition. So there's a lot of progress was made. The negotiations and the discussions and the dynamics that needed to be worked at, seems like those were in a really good spot. And And as long as there weren't material changes in the makeup of the House and Senate in Pennsylvania, expectations are that we should have a high likelihood of a bill being brought to the governor in the new year. And fortunately, it looks like nothing materially changed in House and Senate makeup there. So we're optimistic. We spent a lot of time, and not just us, other peers in the space spent a lot of time making sure that those legislators that are leading that issue really understand what that market, how it operates, and what well-run adult use can look like, and the benefits, not only for companies, but public health, public safety, and employee bases. So there's a lot of, I would say there is a good number of very educated legislators that are the lead stakeholders in getting that legislation move forward in PA. So that's always encouraging.
That is absolutely. And then another major market, or not major, I don't know if it's a major market right now for the core business, but you do have a presence there, is New York. We're starting to see New York materialize to $1 billion annualized run rate. Do you plan to flip any of your stores into adult use, and how are you seeing any sort of green shoots from the wholesale market in New York?
New York for us still is, while the market, the overall market performance is encouraging. If you double click and triple click on it, it's still a market that that fee is giant. That $20 million obligation that they're putting on ROs to move forward is like, you don't get a return. That's just a cost to buy the ticket, and it's tough. It's tough to see that as commercially viable compared to other opportunities that we either have in the footprint or other opportunities that we don't have in our footprint yet. Right. But we're always observing and analyzing, and we'll keep our eye on it.
Is there? You're not the first one that we've heard that from, and I agree with you from an allocation of capital perspective. It really doesn't make sense to deploy that kind of money into New York. Is there an inflection point in the market from, let's say, a top line perspective, $2-3 billion, to where it does make sense to come into the market, or is that just too far down the road and it's kind of you guys are actively evaluating it as it materializes?
I mean, it's not there yet. It's not there yet, because you also have to look at it like the opportunity that's there. It's a decent opportunity, but it is still a limited opportunity from an operator standpoint. You're capped. I think it's 100,000 square feet of canopy, right, with their license, and 3 adult use retail stores. So $20 million to have the right to do that. Again, it may someday, but
a lot of money and timing's got to make sense, right?
Yeah.
And the timing's not now. First 90 days, Ohio, how would you best describe it?
Med Market Plus.
Okay.
Med
Do
Plus.
You have any?
You want to elaborate on that?
Are there?
I was just going to say, I think we talked about it last time I was on after our Q2 call. I tempered expectations on that call. Yeah. And it was for, I didn't know if there was going to be supply there. But I think we learned something. We learned a few things. We learn things all the time, right? I mean, with everything that is new in this space, you learn something from it. I would say the Ohio launches, there were some lessons to be learned in it. And one of the things is,
you have any concerns related to it?
I don't. It's timing. It's timing and sort of the pace. I think it'll ramp up to be the market that it's supposed to be. But the reality of the situation is adult use has not launched there yet. It was the medical program where you were allowed to let non-patients in the door too. And that medical program has some idiosyncrasies. I don't know if anybody shops there, but like, it's not your normal sizing. We sell tenths in that market, right? So there's no pre-rolls because the consumption method of smoking is not allowed. And those are things that are applicable to the medical structure that we anticipate will be different in the adult use structure when those rules are finalized. Look, I think overall, it was the medical market plus And we'll continue to see it reach adult use status as these rules get finalized. Some of them have already, but the really meaningful ones, like related to form factors and marketing and ability to communicate with consumers, we anticipate at the beginning of the year, those getting across the finish line.
Okay. Because those rules weren't those rules supposed to be implemented by, I think, I could be wrong here, but September 7th was the date?
Yes, that's Ohio in a nutshell, right? It was
Okay.
Those rules needed to be finalized by September. We were told right after the ballot initiative passed, there was no way those rules were going to be finalized by September. So we were a little frustrated by it. Then they made that change to say, well, we want to make sure though that there's not too much time between law passing and AU launching. So we're going to make a modification to allow you guys to let non-patients in your doors. We found out on a Thursday of when those dispensaries were going to be able to open on Tuesday. All of those things are just what we're learning is
the turnout though in Cincinnati on the day that you went live. That was a great location, great response. Would you have 12 or 13 different media companies that were down there to the day of?
Yeah, the team did a great job of again trying to build awareness in a structure that doesn't allow you to communicate at all.
So it does sound like it does sound like the regulatory bodies are actively communicating with the operators. From what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. That's a plus. For me, that's a plus. As long as it's not silence and there's light at the end of the tunnel and they're actively conversing with the operators and we can see when it's going to, let's say, flip full adult use, that's good enough for me right now at face value.
Yeah. One of the things we're doing this week during earnings season is reaching out to just one question where viewers have. Killer Chep writes, Mr. Bachtell, do you or the NCR have connections with the Republican side of the LLE? I don't know what that stands for, but have these conversations already been happening? Do you care to comment on that? Of course, obviously you have the connections, but I think we kind of elaborated or touched on that at the beginning of the top of the podcast that, you know, some of the strategies and ideas. But what do you think as far as like, will you be in touch with these people right away? Will it happen post January 20th once they're in office? Like, what's next steps?
I think next steps are we need to see as the dust settles here over the coming weeks. You know, I mean, technically the House hasn't been decided yet. I think all indications are that it's going to be Republican, but the appointees, those things we'll learn a lot more over the coming weeks. But if it was related to, you know, whether or not we've been in touch with the sort of the Republican side of the issue, the industry has absolutely had a bipartisan approach to this over the last couple of years. We've spent as much time with Schumer and that side as we have with Daines and that side. So, you know, one thing I can also confirm, the education level of the key stakeholder legislators in DC is also substantially higher than it was 2 years ago, and so they're more prepared than ever to move something forward. I could also confirm that the intent is there too. It's just intent has to line up with political climate and environment in order for anything to move forward. And we'll know more about like a lame duck session here in the coming weeks also.
So would you say that it's arguably better that we got a red wave throughout the bodies of government to enable us to get stuff done? Now it's on us to educate those lawmakers and stakeholders and educate them to the degree that they're going to actually get something done this time around, now that there's not really that roadblock of just not bipartisan, but just partisan politics that were just causing gridlock like before?
I don't know that we know the answer to that yet. I think we always have the obligation to educate. So when those decision makers are put in a position to have to make a decision, they've got all the information that they can have to make an educated, thorough, thoughtful decision. But I think there's arguments you could people say when there is only a one side in power, whether or not stuff gets done more or less in that scenario is debatable. So we'll see. All we can do is focus on what we can control, and try and influence as much as we can.
Yeah. And I know you haven't made a move into this category yet, but I have to ask, what's your view on hemp? Where do you see it going? And should we expect to see, let's say, some of Cresco's core brands that we've seen have immense strength in these markets, create a hemp derivative product and bring it to market?
I would say it's not lost on us that this is out there, right? This other approach to getting cannabinoids to consumers, and so it's something that we've been evaluating, developing an opinion and potentially a strategy for. But it all just depends on what happens legislatively. Like if there's no relief for state legal, highly regulated cannabis, and the opportunity to participate in THC based hemp products continues to be a viable opportunity, we have to, like, it would only be a prudent, it would be a responsible thing as a fiduciary for the company to make sure that we put ourselves in position to be successful in the cannabinoid industry, whatever that ends up looking like. But that for sure also still has yet to be written. We'll see what happens in the coming year on hemp, THC based hemp products. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, for people out there that were being punched in the gut here this week, they're taking it hard with happening in Florida. For people casting their doubts on the unknowns regarding Washington over the next 4 years, let's face it, 2021, the Biden administration came in, we were feeling optimistic. So moving forward, if you're speaking to a group of investors, what's the message? Does this feel different this time than where we were 4 years ago?
Yeah, it does, because as we talked about a little earlier, like, you'd never had a scenario where you had both candidates for president talking about how they support reform. And you had this one in particular, the successful candidate, lay out his position on it as clearly and articulately as he did. And so from that standpoint of just the alignment also of the fundamental approach to how he sees governing and policy making, I do think that there's an alignment there with the way that stakeholders in cannabis have thought about cannabis for a long time. Yeah. And so the optimism is real. And again, when you layer in 500,000 American jobs, $4 billion in state tax revenue being created, and this dynamic of foreign companies having access to our capital markets and us not, when we literally are the definition of a thoughtful, common sense approach to state legalized cannabis. That's what our operators are. That's who we are. Yeah. We are those operators in those common sense based state law programs.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to be leaning on you guys as far as what's next. I think there's going to be a lot of people over the next few months. They're going to want to get some dialogue and feedback as to what's progressing, because we all know right now this is a Washington play pertaining to the space. But there's a lot of great stats, data, as you've always said, Anthony. If there's ever a point that you want to make, back it up with actual real stats. And right now, common sense wise, there is so much that we could show. So now it's just, let's present it in the right way. And we'll touch on, we were supposed to talk about earnings. 180 million revenue, gross profit of 93 million, adjusted gross profit of 95 million, and adjusted gross margin of 53% of revenue at 250 basis points improvement year over year. So all in all, on the up and up. Charlie, always good catching up with you. Let's keep in touch. And man, I was in Chicago last month, and I cannot believe that Sunnyside location across from Wrigley Field. What a place. How did you guys get that location? That's Jason took me down, but I can't imagine a place like that. Talking about edibles being sold, because you're not going in smoking a joint at a Cubs game, but I'm like, I cannot believe the foot traffic that would go in there during a summertime. But it's more than just a ballpark. It's an actual village. It's just one of the great places to be in the U.S. in the summertime, but great spot. We'll have more of that content actually coming up in a bit, but that's a great spot. I think you get probably a lot of great feedback pertaining to it.
Definitely. Well, thanks guys. I love being here. Thank you. Good to see you.
Appreciate it. Let's keep in touch.
Look forward to talking soon. Hopefully we got some momentum on the legislative side.
Yes.
It'll be nice.
Well, that was interesting, and I love the messaging. It's like they're aligned, and I would think when he brought up the whole idea of access to capital markets, that is going to ring home big time with this administration. And in a lot of ways, we talked about this earlier this week. Gretchen, you made a good point about how we need to, this is kind of the approach that we need to take from an economic standpoint with this new party. And hopefully that is indeed what's going to happen. And with that, if the person that kind of brings all this together in one room with all these executives, let's welcome back in the Senior Vice President of the United States Cannabis Council, David Culver. Man, we should have you on twice a week, every week. What do you think, my friend? What do you think?
Well, great to be back with you, gentlemen. So much to discuss. and always great to listen to Charlie with his insights about everything going on here in Washington. He's one of those CEOs that he's the chairman of the U.S. Cannabis Council, but he's very engaged politically in Washington, and his leadership, actually, especially over the last couple of years, has really put us in the position that we're in right now. So it was great to hear his thoughts.
One thing that Anthony and I are really happy with this week is just the access of network of people that we've been able to get on. And I think we have had so much information to basically process. There's been a lot of incredible info that was presented. Charlie just mentioned this. Boris just mentioned it. I know we had you on Monday. We were talking about if Amendment 3 would pass, who the president would be. We have our answers now. So no on Amendment 3. We have a Donald Trump presidency. How would you characterize, I guess, the week that was just had in this space?
Yeah, well, Charlie hit on a lot of the high points, but look, I think a lot of folks in the cannabis space woke up on Wednesday morning feeling that we had really lost the opportunity for legalization or any semblance of reform, even incremental reform. But I woke up very optimistic, actually, about this administration and even the Republican Congress. And it is going to be a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and that should be announced probably by early next week. There's a lot of uncertainty, of course, with the Trump administration and with the Republican Congress, but we are going to get clarity from the transition team in terms of their priorities. We're also going to be able to get a better understanding of what they plan to do in 2025. So
and that's taking place next week, you said, David?
I'm sorry?
So did you say that was taking place next week? I misunderstand you there. I thought you said you're going to be speaking to them in the next little bit. Maybe I read that wrong, but
no.
Sorry.
So the transition team hasn't opened their doors yet, but they will sooner rather than later. And we, of course, are going to be there at their doorstep, knocking on the door as soon as it opens, with a list of priorities. And Charlie ticked on one, which is access to capital markets, which is going to be a key pillar of what we advocate for. But we've got all of the USCC CEOs and other key members of their teams coming to Washington week after next, and we will have all sorts of discussions on Capitol Hill about 2025. And the pathway forward. But, again, I don't want to oversell my optimism here. This was not the situation that a lot of folks in the space were hoping for. But I do think we have a real possibility to get reform done, incremental reform, and also planning for full legalization from a conservative perspective, which is very different from what the Democrats have been advocating for decades.
I was going to ask. So Kamala had her agenda. I don't know how to frame this. I don't want to sound un-PC, but her Black agenda, she came out and said it. She wanted to legalize cannabis as part of her Black agenda. Tim Walz came out and said that she wanted the participants to make money in the industry that were harmed. Do you see there being a social equity component within the industry, regardless if it's to that degree or whatever degree we get it done, being inherent in, let's say, any sort of initiative under the Trump administration?
Yeah, we have a long way to go to answer that question, Anthony. And I think that it's something that USCC is going to continue to advocate for. We have been very active on these issues for many, many years, and we're going to continue to do that. And I do think that as long as we educate this new administration properly about what we have been advocating for, there's going to be appetite for it. But what we do know is that the president has come out and supported the move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. We know that he has supported the Safe Banking Act. He's made that very clear. And I think that, coupled with access to capital markets, those three things are really going to be our starting point as we begin the conversations with them next year.
Yeah, that's the angle that I've been hearing this week, is that this is going to be all about an economic play and the opportunities it presents for the overall industry. So when you get that opportunity, I don't want to sit here and see, like, what do you think they'll say? What do you think they won't say? Let's just find out and get the meeting taking place and go from there. But what I would like to know is that if you're in a room full of all the top CEOs in the cannabis space, what's your message to them? What is that you want to convey to them?
Well, we're going to have many of them in Washington next week, or week after next, rather. And we will be up on the Hill for 2 plus days, talking about cannabis reform, all things cannabis reform. But look, my message to them, in addition to laying out the specifics of what my strategy is going to be for them to review and to sign off on, is really to make sure that we are coordinating on strategy, we are coordinating on messaging, and we are coordinating on the implementation. We have got to do this together, and we've got to all be singing off the same song sheet. And there's been a lot of issues where we've had differing opinions within the cannabis space. There's been a lot of confusion on Capitol Hill as a result. And I think that because we are given the opportunity to work with a single party on cannabis reform for the next 2 years at a minimum, this becomes even more critical. And we built USCC and launched it in 2021 to be a big tent trade association here in Washington, D.C. That's still the intention of this. And I really do hope that everybody that is an active player in Washington can really get on board with the messaging that we all agree on and help us implement.
So from a messaging perspective and from a priority perspective, there's a lot of regardless of what Donald Trump has come out and said, as far as sensible cannabis takes on the campaign trail, there's an overwhelming skepticism as it relates to the GOP due to some of the prohibitionist takes we've seen from several senators, several governors. They haven't been quiet in their agendas. In terms of priority, is it getting to the executive first and educating them and bringing industry influence? Or is it just as important on the legislative level to be having those one-on-one meetings, educating those legislators, and start to move the needle there as well?
Great question, and the answer is both. So we have got to be up on Capitol Hill, educating the new leadership in the Senate in particular about cannabis reform. And again, I'm going to go back to the comment that Charlie made about the positioning that we're in right now versus 2 years ago, because we have done a really good job, those of us that are here in Washington, educating conservative lawmakers about all aspects of cannabis reform. So we need to build on that with the new members that are coming in, with the new leadership. But to the administration question, if we can get President Trump from the White House to endorse legislation like the Safe Banking Act and other incremental reform measures that Congress may choose to tackle, that is invaluable. And that will certainly be on my wish list with his group, is to endorse the Safe Banking Act and to call for its passage if we don't get it done during the lame duck.
Yeah, there was actually a headline out there yesterday from David Joyce's comms director, I think, that was saying that he's ready to refile the bill if it doesn't get action in the lame duck session. Yeah, which was positive to see.
Yeah, I spoke to his chief of staff yesterday, and we do have a play in the lame duck with the Safe Banking Act if it is coupled with the crypto legislation. So that's something that we're going to be doing the spade work with our members in November and December. We've got a big activation that we're going to be doing at one of the trade shows in December around the Safe Banking Act. So we're going to push real hard to get this done. But the fact of the matter is that the speaker's got a very delicate caucus, as you guys know, and it's going to be relatively difficult for him to get anything done that's not must pass. And they're going to want to take a lot of they're going to want to move a lot of this discussion of all things policy related into 2025 so that they can do it, with a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and President Trump.
Yeah. So that is strategically how they're thinking about it. Let's say if something can materialize in the lame duck, it's attaching SAFE to that stablecoin bill and getting it through.
That's the play, yeah. And you guys will remember that Chairman McHenry from North Carolina is retiring.
Yes.
He is a big proponent of the stablecoin legislation. He is also open to the idea of coupling it with safe banking. So that again that's the play, and that's what you're going to hear me talking about for the next 2 months, trying to get that done.
Well, strategically, I like that. I mean, I think it would resonate better, like you had said, in 2025, as I think crypto is going to be part of the Trump administration agenda. They're going to want to get legislation like that stablecoin bill passed as we need it, but it'd be beautiful to see it done in the lame duck and potentially getting SAFE attached to it. Because I know we were talking about that probably, I think it was like 6 to 9 months ago, the viability of it being attached to that bill. So it's good to see it coming back into conversation.
Well, the new senator from Ohio also is a big fan of cryptocurrency, and this may be something, Bernie Moreno. So this may be something that they want to give to him as a win, an early win coming in as a freshman senator. So again, this is all me just speculating here, but
he's not a friend. He's not a friend of cannabis, though.
He is not a friend of cannabis.
I've done my homework on him since he was replacing Sherrod Brown, who didn't get anything done, but at least he had positive talking points on the industry. And Senator Moreno thinks it shouldn't be legal whatsoever. He's pretty much like Ron DeSantis. But he also, as to your point, is a big proponent of the stablecoin bill and getting crypto legislation passed. So hopefully he can look past one thing to get some sensible reform passed.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think Chairman McHenry is a big fan of cannabis reform either, but he's very willing to add that into the equation if they can move that bill. So we'll see how it plays out. And we did get some new senators that came in as well that have voted yes on the Safe Banking Act previously. So I'm hopeful that.
Am I correct in my assumption that, let's say, some of these GOP legislators and people that are against cannabis, they start to warm up to the idea and they see the levers that we want to pull as more benign if they don't include greater accessibility to the plant?
Yeah, look, this is a public safety bill, and that's the message that we give to all members, including conservative Republicans. But the bigger factor here that I'm really thinking about is the move to Schedule 3. And when cannabis does move down to Schedule 3, I mentioned this to you guys earlier this week, it's just going to make it easier for conservatives to work on cannabis reform issues because cannabis is going to be sitting next to Tylenol with codeine versus heroin. And that is a game changer.
Absolutely.
So this is more than just the 280E tax relief. This is the political relief that the Republicans are going to get as a result of that move.
We're getting some hotly contested comments regarding social equity. Many people believing that we need to focus on the jobs and economic side of messaging with this administration moving forward and less on social equity. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that, again, we have to wait and see kind of what appetite they have for cannabis reform, period. This is something that I think will be important. The social equity piece will be important to talk to them about. And it'll certainly be on my list of things that we get into. And, the president has had a number of friends that have talked to him about the social equity issue. So I don't think that, it should be ignored. But I also think that we know from his public statements that he is comfortable with Schedule 3, with the Safe Banking Act, and with some of the folks that he's going to put into senior positions in his administration, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is very much pro-legalization. I don't know what his role is going to be, but it's going to be a senior one. I expect him also to lean into the president and press for additional comment on legalization. And really start to figure out what that conservative pathway would look like. And the way that President Trump and his administration, I think, will ultimately approach this, if they choose to, is again from that public safety perspective that you heard out of him early on. So public safety, safe rights, states' rights, protecting youth from products, et cetera. And it's very different from
do you believe that? Do you believe that? Like, we're talking about a man that basically prided himself around a campaign that basically won an election on jobs and economy. Like what is the strategy? Like what's go ahead.
I couldn't agree with David more. Public safety works. It definitely also works for the base. Conservatives, jobs, economics, yes, that's 1 and 2. Public safety is when people start to understand that cannabis is not the bad guy. It's not the boogeyman. You're not going to descend into madness. Not the biggest, but one of, I think, the most impactful talking points that DeSantis had in Florida against Amendment 3 was it's going to turn Florida into California or New York. That comment I got lit up with on Twitter. It was all over Miami. We saw how Miami voted for Amendment 3. Public safety, I think, is paramount if you're talking about orders of magnitude of what's important.
Yeah.
As far as the message resonating and getting people comfortable.
Yeah.
Because they want to make sure the kids and the public are going to be safe.
If you want to protect the roadways, if you want to make sure that products are not adulterated, if you want to make sure that kids are not getting their hands on this stuff, that it's not marketed and advertised to kids, then take it off schedule, regulate it federally, and make sure that you give the bulk of the regulations to the states. But that's how ultimately you control this. And the other issue is that.
So is that the strategy for step one moving forward with them?
Again, this is, I think, the discussion about full legalization further down the road.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And look, for the audience, you guys should be thinking about everything moving backwards from 2026. Like, these are political people. They do political things. So, whether it's rescheduling or whether it's Safe Banking Act or any other incremental reform in the cannabis space, think about it from November 2026 back, because they are going to want to use this issue as an election issue. And I've heard a lot of folks hating on cannabis this cycle. It didn't win. It lost all over the place. No, this is still a very popular issue at the ballot box. It's going to continue to be, and they're going to want to use it. But, the discussion around cannabis reform, we are not on their top 10 list. And right now what they're doing is they've got a whiteboard. They're writing all the things down that the president said he was going to do. And they're going to prioritize what they're going to do first, second, third, and fourth. That's what you're going to see in the first 100 days. And then they're going to start talking about some of these second and third tier issues. And that's where cannabis is going to be. But we have moved up significantly in terms of their priority list from where we were during his last term.
Well, I hope you have some productive meetings. I hope we can be part of that strategy too, because I think our audience would love some of this content that we can make and progress as to pushing the narrative forward. So let us know if there's anything that we can do to help in any way. But look, you had an impact on Joe Biden. That era or administration is now over and is going to be over, and it's on to a new one. So best of luck to you. And thanks for coming on, giving us the feedback. And let's please keep in touch over the coming weeks as we start to, get some feedback on some of the meetings that you've had and some dialogue. I think our viewers would get a lot of interest and I think helpful information moving forward, because I know there's a lot of people on here right now that are just concerned with the industry. So it's at play, this space related to Washington. So let's keep in touch and we'll go from there. Okay.
We'll do it. Gentlemen, thanks for having me. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah, holy cow. Those comments just lit on fire when you bring up the whole social equity angle.
Can't bring up social equity. It gets the people going. Shit. It is what it is.
Yeah. Charlie was great too, I thought.
Yeah, Charlie's, it's great. I think what we've seen the last couple of days as far as the interviews go, I mean, people like when we get the CEOs on here because it's unscripted. Yes, everybody's dove into the numbers before the CEOs come on our show, but we can talk to them about what's fundamentally happening. We can talk to them about government affairs. It comes off script once they're off the earnings call, so they get a different perspective than what they got on the earnings call, which is good to know.
I think I like the approach too. Like you said, it's like yesterday with Boris, even Charlie today, we talked about the new administration, among other things. He made a very good point, obviously, Charlie, this morning about access to capital markets. And we really didn't get into the numbers all that much, like you said. But,
everyone knows the number. Everyone knows the numbers by now. We can. They had a little bit of margin degradation. They had growth in other segments of the business. The numbers are the numbers. I prefer to talk about the footprints, the fundamental aspect of the businesses, and then people can make their assumptions from there.
Yeah, that you're great.
But they're not going to get insights. They're not going to get insights into the fundamentals and the footprints, really, of the businesses and their perspectives by reading the earnings report. The numbers they can read on the earnings report, and I feel like they can make their own educated decisions themselves.
Yeah. Cole memo. Charlie is cool. Yes, he is cool as a cucumber. If there was an asteroid coming towards our planet, I think he'd just say, chill, we're going to be all right. Very, very good head on his shoulders in a very volatile industry. We're going to have Canopy Growth. We're actually recording with David Klein this afternoon. So I know they just released their earnings. So we will touch on that with an in-depth interview with their CEO, David Klein. That'll be pushed out early next week on Monday or Tuesday. So just in case you know. And then Michael DeGiulio from Village Farms is coming on the live stream Monday afternoon. Looking forward to that when they're see how they're progressing. And the new CEO of Ascend Wellness is going to Village had a nice print.
Village had a nice print. And it'll be interesting to hear Michael's feedback on them being on the list for the 12-2 hearing at the ALJ.
That's a very good point. Not sure how much he can comment, but that definitely grabbed my attention. All right, we are at the 50-minute mark. Guess what, everyone? It is time to finish this week on a high note. It's the greatest time of the week. It's Mic Drop with Guap.
I got those too from Advisor Shares.
I did too.
Yeah, did everyone vote? What a week, boys. That was back to back to back to back. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, I like hearing myself speak.
I don't know about you guys, but I slept 10 hours the last 2 nights in a row. I think the key to getting good interviews in this space is exhaustion.
Sorry, God.
If we get these CEOs good and exhausted from earnings and election madness, I think we get the raw truth. And I have to say, you guys handled it well, but go back and watch Gretchen's interview on Wednesday. That was some raw stuff. We had Boris and Jason giving us some really juicy info nugs yesterday.
Shout out to Gretchen for coming on last minute. Gretchen, I know you're watching and giving some comments. You were amazing on Wednesday with, tell it like it is. That's what we need. Can't sugarcoat, but anyway, continue your thought, Guap.
No, just to continuously promote the content we've already done, but it was a strong week all around, and there's reasons for optimism. I know everyone's kind of bummed out here and there, but there is definitely reason for optimism after a good night's sleep.
Yes. John Roy, thank you. This has been the best week of your podcast. You got to stop and think about, it's been pretty cool, obviously, meeting people like yourselves along this little journey of this company, but it's pretty surreal to think of what we have accomplished this week. But, it's not about us. It's about obviously the community that's out there. And the more and more that we continue to do good work like this, we're going to have access to more and more people. But, just to let people know, we are trying to work hard to work with the U.S. Cannabis Council, because I think that would be extremely beneficial for all of our community to understand the conversations that are being had in Washington. And really, what better way to educate politicians from Anthony and I and shedding light, because great, it's cool to have a conversation one-on-one in a room, but if you can actually produce video content for an entire audience that can't make it, that sees what goes on, that's huge. Anyway, continue your thoughts.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think my fantasy has always been to clockwork orange some of these politicians into watching some video of patients and veterans and everyone else who's used cannabis as medicine. So the closer we can get to that fantasy, I think that's what really changes hearts and minds, beyond the sort of economic job creation and public safety. If I'm going to go number 4, it's also public health. It helps people. help us help you. It's like tax revenue for you. Help us, so the arguments are there. They're obvious. We had a red wave. So thoughts on that aside from all personal politics, at least like Gretchen said, at least something can happen. And it's great to hear both lobbyists as well as industry leaders coming up with an aligned strategy. And it's already been happening. It's already been in the works to try to get a Trump administration with the people he's surrounding with to actually take action.
What would you do?
I don't care who does it.
What's the first thing you would ask Donald Trump if you were in a room and smoked a joint with him?
Did you actually mean what you said in your True Social post when you spoke about cannabis?
What was that?
Did you actually mean what you said when you endorsed Amendment 3, talked about safe banking, talked about states' rights? Or was that a campaign ploy? That's it. That's all you need to know.
It's the first question you'd ask JD Vance.
JD Vance, I would ask him if he's going to co-sponsor SAFE now.
Yeah.
Anthony's dead on as usual. Yeah, I can't disagree with either of those.
Yeah. Let's get some progress. I know a lot of people are uncertain.
I don't care if people mean it. I care if they do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Right? We are at a stage where we need action. We've been saying that forever.
So I want to close out with
Let's close her, buddy.
late breaking tweet of the week, unless you guys have anything else. My friend Livy put out a banger, as the kids say. We have a tremendous opportunity to rewrite the cannabis narrative. Old narrative is this is a vice. We got to get regulatory capture equals generational wealth. New narrative, wellness plus quality equals generational health. The results of the latter lead to the results of the former. Do what's good for the patient and the consumer, and the results in terms of legislation and money positively flowing to the sector follow. I think that's a great way to kind of flip it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that someone like RFK and Tulsi is in Trump's ear, because he's got a lot going on, and he's got to have to lean on some people for sure.
Well said, my friend. Cannabis revolution. We just need some clarity now that they're elected. Be nice for them to make a statement. So managing expectations, you're not going to get that statement, especially in the first 100 days of this administration. But I can say that there's lots of dialogue going on behind the scenes. I was at an event last night in Michigan where I said earlier that I met with some representatives from the NCR. And there's some big board meetings that are taking place amongst the biggest thinking minds in cannabis over the next 2 weeks. That's the strategy. They'll come up with the game plan. And from there, that's when they'll start countering, obviously, their conversations with Washington. So you won't get a statement from the Trump administration, but you will get dialogue based on the guests that we're going to have on this platform from those conversations. So that's what we can expect and anticipate. But I don't know how much is going to be done between now and the end of the calendar year, but this is going to be front and center for a lot of people's concerns beginning in January. And we'll make sure that we provide up-to-date information when we have something valuable to share. Anything else you guys want to add?
I am good.
No, I think each of you guys deserve a siesta after this week. That was grueling.
It was grueling. Do you know the average door in Michigan does $4 million? I learned that last night. $4 million.
That's how you hit a $300 million a month run rate. Give or take 10%.
Private side is killing right now in that market, outperforming a lot of the public equity companies in that space. But man, I met some owners last night. Holy cow, doing $500 million annually with all the locations they have across Michigan, Colorado, and Arizona. Some big private players, to say the least. That's huge cash.
Yeah, I don't know what the margins are like. I know prices are really good, but I do have some friends from Michigan that make it up there and say the product is top notch, the price is top notch. So again, that's very consumer friendly. And I've got some friends who have set up some outdoor grows out there as well, and it is a wild and competitive place for sure.
Daniel Fisher, I met him last night, president and CEO of Citizens States Bank. It's the largest privately owned bank in the state of Michigan and the biggest lender within the Michigan cannabis landscape. We're going to look to have him on because his background is on Wall Street as well. But to Charlie's point from earlier, let's get some access to some capital markets with this new administration. So we'll shed some light and have him on the next couple of weeks. But listen, I'm dragging this out. Gents, thank you. As a reminder, people, you want a recap of all the information that we did this week, make sure to subscribe to our Baked In newsletter by scanning that QR code below. Leave some comments below on any guests that you want us to have on for next week. Village Farms Monday. Canopy will be posted on probably Tuesday. We got Ascend Wellness in our live stream Tuesday afternoon. What else we got? Air Wellness, a few others. But busy times, but that's okay. Gents, enjoy your weekend. See you everyone back here on Monday at 4. Get some rest, chill, relax.
Take a deep breath.
Deep breath.
legalize it, and we'll advertise it.
So there it is, everybody. What'd you think of our latest live stream? You love the content we're creating? Anything we're missing? Leave some comments below. We'd love to hear from you. All kinds of things that we like to discuss, but the most important topics, they come from you. And make sure to smash that like button. We very much appreciate it. Also, another thing, 60% of our audience, they're subscribed right now. 40% is not. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to our channel, because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everybody.